Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Today's topic was digitize or die. How does the construction industry embrace and leverage new technologies to solve age-old problems around project management, site delivery, and site management problems? It's a topic that I talk about a lot within the Smart Connected Buildings community. And it's a topic that my esteemed colleague and good friend, John Knight from Ascente, is a well-respected evangelist. And God forbid, I'm going to use the term thought leader within smart connected workspaces of the future. So when I talk about smart buildings, I break it down into smart workspaces, smart facilities management, and smart buildings. So before we dive into the main content of the webinar, I thought it'd be pertinent just to really show you what we mean by a command and control room, a site project office of the future. What does that look like, and what are the components, parts that we're talking about? Without any further ado, I'm going to just introduce John Knight from Ascente. John, would you like to just introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Paul. Thanks for the invite. I'm John Knight, the Managing Director of Ascente.
John, if I can hand over to you, do you want to pull up a couple of the slides and just talk through the high-level concept of what the smart site production room of the future looks like?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Paul. So if I just bring up this slide first of all and just talk through this concept. As people can see, this is a concept, but there are people doing this in reality, and I'll show you that in a second as well. So conceptually, what we're looking at here is a multi-screen environment that is supporting multiple use cases. So on the left-hand wall there, you've got your remote participants who are working from home, working from their headquarters, but they're still listening in on the conversations that are taking place in that project room. Then on the back wall, you've got not one, but multiple screens being utilized to show different types of digital content. Some of that could be a 2 to 6 week look ahead. Some of it could be reviewing challenges or problems on site. But then you've also got this ability to support people using things like tablets and laptops. So whether they want to solve the problems at the screen, whether they're remote, or whether they want to look at content on their own device, there's flexibility and choice around how people are interacting with the experience. But the reason that we have multiple screens is that you need that ability to digitize lots of different software applications together in order for people to be able to create the conversation, to be able to then try and identify how they're going to solve the problem. If you try and cram everything onto one screen, what you end up with is, as we can see on that left-hand image there, a single document being screen shared, and everybody saying, well, how does that compare to where we were last week, for example? And in reality, people may look at this and go, well, that's a lovely concept, but is anybody actually doing it? Well, the short answer is yes, because if I just flick to my next slide, here are examples of real world environments where we've been working with customers from all over the world to deliver exactly what we're talking about here. The technology, as you'd expect, is improving and changing all the time. But as you can see, here are some real world examples of clients that we are working with on this journey.
Super. Thanks, John. So look, the takeaway here is that this isn't revolutionary. This isn't new. This isn't a concept. This is being deployed by the real world today. And there are tangible benefits that are being derived by contractors. So now let's move on to the main content of the webinar, and then we can come back to this at the end of the webinar so that it will provide, so that it will have a little bit more context to it. And then in the Q&A session at the end of it, we're more than happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. In under half an hour, me and John are going to have a relatively relaxed and informal chat on what we've learned over the last few years of working with and implementing technologies within the built world, and specifically driving positive change within the construction industry. And hopefully we're going to impart some knowledge, some key learnings that we've gathered from working with a few tier 1 UK-based contractors, and what the benefits are that they've received from deploying technology. So many people watching this will know that I've been sort of at the forefront of driving change within the built world specifically around smart buildings. Smart connected buildings was set up 7 years ago to solve not one main problem impacting the global real estate industry. 40% of global carbon comes from the built world. John and what Ascente are doing within the smart workspace is just revolutionizing how the office of the future is going to be run and managed. And what we're doing is we're distilling the smart workplace methodology and basically implementing it within the workspace within a construction site, which in essence is a porter cabin that is connected typically in a brownfield site. So you could be building a motorway along the M1, you could be building a bridge. Some of these sites are massively rural. So having connectivity and having a digitized infrastructure to deliver an extremely complex project is where we are seeing the game changers and the early adopters really driving change within the industry and actually getting really positive results from deploying the technology. John, if I can hand over to you and give a little bit of background to your journey and where Ascente fits within the industry, and then we'll kick off the webinar.
I've been involved in various forms of technology since 1997, when I first got involved with a product called a smart board, which at the time nobody in, well, what I could tell, the world had ever heard of. And ever since then, I've been part of conversations around collaboration, visual collaboration, digitization of different business processes. And Ascente are a distributor, which I set up in 2017 to specifically focus on some of the challenges that I believe were already there pre-COVID, where businesses needed to change the way that they were managing their workforce, managing their offices, and digitizing business processes. And then as a result of COVID, what we found is that we're now engaging with a much wider group of end customers who are recognizing that because of the challenges of hybrid working, flexible working, whatever you want to call it, they now need to accelerate that journey. And that's exactly what we're here to help with.
Perfect. Thanks so much, John. I'm going to break the webinar down into sort of 3 chunks. Many people attending today would have got their email this week. And basically the first point that I want to discuss was, let's discover transformative digital solutions. So what many people here want to learn about cutting edge digital technologies and methodologies, such as things like digital pool planning, enhanced collaboration workspaces. How are those sort of technologies really revolutionizing the way that construction projects are planned, managed, and executed? John, the first question I'm sort of thinking is, why do you feel that the construction sector, I'm going to say in the UK, but actually just in general, why is the construction sector so ripe for digital transformation? One of the things I always say is the real estate and construction industry, for many reasons, is the final major industry sector to be digitally transformed. And if you think about it, it's probably one of the oldest, if not the oldest industry globally. Many of the modus operandi, many of the cultural norms are so instilled and ingrained in the industry, there's so much resistance to basically break a very traditional methodology, supply chain approach to basically delivering projects. So I'm just interested to get your thoughts, feedback, and why is the construction sector so ripe and in need of digital transformation?
I think I'm going to start off with a bit of background that I've been involved in. So the industry would probably say that it is already digitized, because that started with things like 2D drawings and CAD and those types of applications. And then the UK government introduced the requirement for projects over a certain size to have a 3D model, which became a BIM model. And I was part of all of that conversation back in the mid 2000s, and the need for businesses to support BIM. And as a result of BIM, we've now got the majority of businesses with projects that are of the right size supporting 2D and 3D models, often linked back to a database. But what I'm finding is that usually all of this is a top-down approach. So it's being led by I can simplistically say maybe white collar workers, people who wear shirts like you and I are today, Paul, who aren't necessarily the traditional guys working actively on site on a project. And the disconnect seems to be, how does that top-down approach of 3D BIM, plans, Gantt charts, how does that actually end up distilling itself onto a construction site and being managed on a day-to-day basis? And usually what I'm seeing is things like construction offices where you go into that porter cabin and there might be a screen in the corner where someone can connect a laptop to have a look at something. But the majority of what goes on is printouts, stuff being stuck on the wall, stuff being written on pieces of paper, people using things like post-it notes and swim lanes to try and solve day-to-day problems on site. And we'll talk about different methodologies a bit later, I believe. And all of this problem solving and the reality of how a project is being run is still completely analog in the majority of cases. So I think overall, I would say that there is, in my opinion, currently a disconnect between that top-down digitization approach being led by people who understand BIM models and Revit and different software applications, and they're experts in how to utilize that. But how does that actually distill itself into the project on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis? And that's where the majority of this stuff is still being printed off, photos being shared on WhatsApp at the very best, of what the current changes or suggested changes are to the plan. And then that's being fed back in to the mothership to make those changes to the digital plan. It's not my definition of collaboration.
Wholeheartedly agree. And I think many people obviously watching this webinar will agree that there's been a reluctance to change the norms when it comes to the built environment or just the construction sector as a whole. And if you look, I'm now 48 years old, right? So if I go back, I always say people typically older than me resist technology, right? Whereas people younger than me embrace technology. And I think traditionally, when you look at the real estate industry, I remember having conversations a long time ago and trying to explain the value of technology. There was always resistance, and people either got it or they didn't get it. If I see what's going on in the industry at the moment, the people that are making moves in the industry are basically following a digital first strategy. So obviously I'm interested in digitizing the built world to drive positive gains through operating systems and just changing norms. And having to try and change the way that buildings are designed has been a challenge, because we've done it this way for hundreds of years. And I'm saying, yeah, you have, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right approach for today. When you go to a construction site, you walk in a construction site in a porter cabin, they all look relatively the same. You've got a table with some chairs, lots of people come in, they have a meeting, they have a daily stand-up, they have a meeting at the beginning of the week. And then up on the board, you've got some paper-based Gantt charts and you've got some paper-based like post-it notes. The companies that understand that if you digitize that process, the value is created in the data that is produced. So if you've got a post-it note stuck to the wall, that post-it note, I will always say, is like a piece of data. But because it's written on a piece of paper, the only way you can see that data is if you're stood in a physical meeting room looking at a post-it note. And obviously when someone opens the door, the post-it note might fly off, and then you go, well, where the hell did that post-it note actually go? And what I like to do is break this down into really simple building blocks. If you look at what we're talking about here, it's like how do you take that analog process and digitize it? And this is where I'm going to sort of segue into sort of question is two, right? So how do you overcome these challenges, right? And I'm going to call out some of the challenges, right? People are scared about technology because they're basically going, I've got to learn a new technology. I've got to learn a new app. And it's like, there's going to be resistance. And because there's resistance, what happens is nothing actually changes. However, the companies that really understand this from the top level, they're saying, we are now a digital first organization. So I don't want to name drop in this session because I know that there's certain main contractors, and people watching this will know certain main contractors are so far ahead than others. When you turn up to one of their construction sites, you walk in, it's the same look, it's the same feel, it's the same technology. They know, everyone knows what they're walking into. So when you talk about technology, talk about repeatable, scalable, supportable deployment of technology. And still today, what happens is every single construction site is as if it's a brand new build. Everyone's bringing their own technologies, their own ways of working. And for me, unless you normalize this and digitize this and put structure around it, you're not going to get the gains and the benefits. So what do you think are the barriers of like this being adopted by construction sites? Why is it that certain players in the industry have been reluctant to deploy this technology?
Well, I mean, I think there's probably lots of barriers, but the two that I'm going to focus on is, in my opinion, the two biggest ones. The first one is what I'm going to call the skills gap. I think it's not unfair to say in a sweeping statement that the majority of people who are working on construction sites may not necessarily be the most adept when it comes to utilizing technology and software. Certainly stuff that is complicated, like making major changes to a 3D model, for example, they probably wouldn't have the skill to be able to do that. The majority of what they're there for is to, as one guy said to us recently, dig a hole, you put the plaster on the wall, put the carpets down, lay the foundations of the building. It's physical manual labor in the majority of cases that these guys are doing, and therefore from a skills perspective, the introduction of technology is not necessarily going to be a natural thing to them. But I think the second element to it is that there's been a general acceptance of the fact that you just have to be physically present on a building site. If you want to be part of that project, because you've got to dig a hole, because you've got to lay the carpet, lay the foundations, therefore you have to be there. But in reality, if you go back to my point at the beginning about the fact that the industry has already started to digitize itself with this top-down approach, when a project, for example, is being bidded on, it's not the guys who are actually going to build the building that are doing the bid. It's a separate team that are producing a beautiful looking 2D, 3D model, producing a Gantt chart to explain how they're going to deliver it. And they're linking that back to things like pricing as well, for example. So you've got this top-down digitization that sort of gets almost mandated into the project. And then it's the job of the site team to deliver against that schedule with a bunch of guys who are, not necessarily technically au fait and familiar. So there's this fundamental disconnect going on between those two different worlds. And the ultimate goal is to work out how to kind of bring all of these elements together. But of course, that's not an easy thing to just achieve with a broad sweeping statement. How does that Gantt chart that might have a program of work that's going to involve 20 different subcontractors and last for a year of time, how does that actually break itself down into the day-to-day activity of the 10 different people from one of those 20 subcontractors going on site and working in a specific part of the building in order to join up the project and deliver the dependencies that might be needed in order for the next team of people to come in the following day and follow on from them and carry on working. And in reality, what ends up happening is that the majority of the time it's, right, we've got a problem, guys, need to call a meeting, as you said earlier. Come on, everyone in Monday morning. Right, we've got this problem that's happened. How are we going to solve that problem? Paul, show the photo of what so-and-so did last week. Right, how are we going to change that, guys? And everything becomes very hand to mouth. So yeah, that's my kind of summary of what I see going on at the moment and some of the challenges.
I want to distill this so everyone's really clear on what we are specifically talking about when we talk about like digital construction is a big topic. And the bit that I think we're specifically laser focused on today is I've done some development in houses that I've lived in, right? So you've got, it's the same, no matter what the construction site is, whether it's a new house, a new tower in London, a new motorway being built somewhere, a new transport hub, a new data center, a new mine, it doesn't matter. The reality is you bid for a project, you make some logical assumptions on how much it's going to cost, you put your bid in, and then it flows along. The bit that we're actually talking about is that's all well and good, but the magic happens when you are bare knuckle fighting day to day to day on site. So if you imagine on a Monday morning, the site manager, the project manager will basically turn up and go, right, guys, we've got to go and deliver this in the next 6 weeks, right? So let's have a chat. How are we going to do that? And what happens is you've got theory and you've got the real world, right? I didn't know that that thing there is in the ground. Why didn't we know that, right? Why hasn't it come up? Right, what do we need to go and do to sort it out? And this is where I like just knowing, I mean, I've done commercial conversions, right? I've been sat in a porter cabin as an investor. And the reality is, right, you turn up on what you think's going to happen, but the money's made on actually solving problems day to day. So no matter what anyone says, a construction site, you've got lots of different areas. The real magic happens on like the 2 to 6 week look ahead. And I remember, like, John, you and I have spoken to what I would deem some of the most advanced thinking project directors out there globally. And what they say is the money's made on how you manage that 6 week look ahead. No matter what anyone says, that's where the money's made. And the rock stars in the industry, the people that make a difference in the industry, they're embracing technology to solve that problem on how do you digitize that process. And make no mistake, a paper-based post-it note on a wall and a printout of a Gantt chart isn't the way that you're going to solve that problem. So you've got lots of different layers here. So let's sort of dive into the detail now, because I want to go through to, like, this is all good in theory. And obviously we're gonna unpack this over the next few weeks as we go into different layers of technology, right? So if we just zoom back out and go, well, look, the companies that have embraced this technology, and in essence, they've used software, they've used tools to look to digitize methodologies such as pull planning. Many people will probably be aware of Last Planner. It's how do you digitize that process? But most importantly, John, what's the value that's being created, right? And what I'm going to stress here is people on this call are going to go, yeah, but that sounds really expensive. Wrong. Okay. I'll give an example, right? We had a conversation the other day. It was a £1.5 billion project. Okay. And at the end of the meeting, they said, yeah, we love this, but I'm really worried. How much is it going to cost? And when we said the software is going to be £4,000, they sat there going, no, really? For £4,000, you can do all of this. And make no mistake, when we talk about cost, I'm saying this isn't about cost. It's about what value are we creating? If you spend £4,000 and we can release £1 million worth of value, everyone's going to go, I want one. Okay. So the whole point of this sort of educational series is I'm going to break it down so that people can start seeing this isn't a quantum leap. It's like, you're not going to go from like analog into the metaverse, right? It's a step-by-step approach. So my question, John, can you explain what value's been created from people that have deployed this technology? And then in the Q&A session after this, we will actually show the technology and we'll do some demos. But what's the value that's been created from the solutions that are being deployed?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think whether you call it value or return on investment, I think that is actually the other. You know, you asked me earlier what are the reasons that people aren't deploying this already, and I think cost is always the factor that gets highlighted. In order to try and understand the value, it would potentially relate to the individual, contractor or project, but let's try and simplify some of the principles. The thing is that you're looking at a way of trying to centralize communication, because if your communication can be digitized, then on a day-to-day basis, you've got an ability for people who are not necessarily always in the room to participate more actively in the project. Now, whether that's that example of a project where you've got lots of subcontractors on the project and the guys on site are struggling with something and they want to get a second opinion, or whether it's the general contractor who wants to, they're experts into what's happening on site. But that ability to support a proper 24/7, anywhere in the world, collaboration solution from each project office where projects are actually actively being run from. There's massive value there. And you can relate it directly to cost of travel or time if you wanted to, ability to solve problems faster. The second thing that I'll just highlight is there's been discussions about in the world of BIM, for example, about clash detection. Clash detection was created in order for a 3D model to be utilized to identify a potential clash in the physical world before that clash takes place. Well, why is that principle not necessarily being applied in a digitized methodology to the way that a project is being managed day to day? How many times have I turned up to a construction site and found out that I cut work on that particular part of the building because so and so hasn't finished something, and therefore my guys have either got to go and do something else or we've got to come back. It's a direct cost to us as a subcontractor in this particular example, but it also is a direct cost to the overall project. So, this principle of identifying clashes of labor, subcontractors, management of supply chain, creating smooth and seamless process of trying to actually manage all of that and digitize it in a way where the people are actually responsible for scheduling that labor, for example, who aren't on site, who aren't in the project office, know what's going on, not just today, but also, as you said, in the next 2 to 6 weeks. All of that side of things, if that can be truly digitized to replicate the principle of what clash detection is there to do in a BIM model, then that's an example of where there's massive return on investment, because what that actually means is the project will be delivered smoother, faster, less cost, less potential risk of overrun, and a lot of margin gets eaten away at the end of a project when that final list of snagging or the project actually overruns and there are penalty clauses in the original contract that's been signed, which then means that any profit gets eaten away from the job. All kinds of different ways where you can start to demonstrate true value and true return on investment.
Perfect. Thanks so much, John. So I think we've come up to the half hour. If I just conclude with this, right? So for me, we've sort of spoken about some of the challenges that I'm hoping will resonate with most people watching this webinar, either live or the recording. During 2024, I think I've made it my mission within Smart Connected Buildings to try and drive this whole agenda around, let's say, digital construction. John, I know you and I are going to be at Digital Construction Week in June. Up until June, we're going to be providing a lot of content, thought leadership, a few ideas, just trying to change the conversation in the marketplace. And then hopefully anyone watching this, if you are going to be at Construction Week in June, just make sure that you come over and book a session at the Ascente stand, because everything we're talking about, we're going to have a real live immersive experience. You can see the technology, you can ask the questions, you can meet the thought leaders that are basically driving this change. And for me, that's going to be hopefully something that's going to really change the conversation within the construction sector. And for me, my role is really to try and educate the market, because I get it, okay? I understand that most people listening to this are going to resist technology. Oh, it's another software layer. It's another application. I don't want to have to learn this. If there's one takeaway that I want people to understand today is, make no mistake, the plasterers, the bricklayers, the road builders, the diggers, when they see this technology, there is no learning process. All you are doing is digitizing a post-it. If I break it down really simply, you're taking a physical post-it note on a wall, you're sticking it into a digital touchscreen, and you are literally using technology to do exactly what you did in the wall. The benefit, though, is because that is in the, God forbid, the metaverse, it's up in the cloud, it's digitized, you can basically let anyone, anywhere, across the planet that's got an IT data connection, they can engage with this conversation directly. And this is where you're immersing digital software, immersive collaboration experiences, remote working and teams, hybrid working. And finally, if you think about you've got a problem, the problem that you've got on site, the reality is there will be someone that's had that problem somewhere else in the business. They may not, they may be on the other side of the planet. You're not going to get that person to turn up to a construction site. The only way you're going to get them to turn up in the construction site is through technology. They will allow an MS Teams link. They'll be on a camera. How do you have that immersive experience to go, we've got a problem, you've solved this problem before, can you help us? The companies that use technology to solve problems quickly and efficiently are going to win. They're going to be able to bid cheaper. They're going to be able to provide value upfront to clients, and they're going to win projects. Why? Because they're following a digital first strategy. And I'm going to leave it. The title of this was Digitize or Die. Yes, it's a ballsy title. But you know what? After 27 years of trying to deliver and explain how does technology drive value within the built world, the gloves are off now, right? Because you know what? COVID's taught us one thing. The companies that had a digital first strategy won. There were so many real estate companies that could not even send an FM contractor to their building, and their building sat there in the middle of London with every single light on, and no one's in that building. Absolute disgrace, right? And like, I'm going to call it out. For me, if the industry doesn't digitize, they're going to fail. So for me, this isn't a like, when are you going to do it? This is, you need to do it fast because there is no downside. And I'm going to try and make a relation here, right? ESG. Everyone's resisting ESG. Oh, it's too scary. It's too big. It's not too. There is no downside to following an ESG strategy. Why? The first thing you're going to do is you're going to go, what do we have today? Where are the quick wins and how can we save money? And within literally a 1 to 3 month period, you're going to identify pockets of cost savings very quickly, just because you're going to use technology and software to go and automate traditional processes. This thing's moving, right? And it's moving faster than it's ever done. And the beautiful thing that I see in this world of smart connected buildings is the conversation I've been having with the industry over and over and over again. We are now sat at something that's going to change rapidly. And I just see it. The companies that are embracing technology and following a digital first strategy and doing first mover advantage, they are going to be winning. They are winning. They're winning awards because of project delivery. Their health and safety numbers are lower than anyone else in the industry. The HSE is recognizing them. The supply chain are set up going, you know what? I really enjoy this technology because it makes my life easier. We can work and we collaborate. So, John, I really appreciate your time today. And I look forward to following up with this at some point in the near future. So thanks ever so much for your time. I hope to catch up with you shortly. Thanks everyone for listening. Take care, have a good day, and have a lovely weekend. Bye for now.
Thanks, Paul.